Welcome, this is Charlie from CIC News for You with another sensitive topic. The now published 1619 Project by the New York Times Magazine. This project is currently in many K-12 schools throughout the United States, teaching our children history from a Black perspective. I have no problems with this because we need to teach the truth and update our history as new information is validated, and to add information that was omitted. We need to make these corrections to our history, in my opinion. However, what I have been finding out about the 1619 Project were comments about the project that stated this was a one-sided view of our history that is factually wrong in more than one situation. These concerns were coming from historians, the experts in the field. One other reason this topic interested me is because I have grandkids that are in the K-12 area, the target of the 1619 Project. So, if you are like me, you are not aware of what this project is or how it could potentially change how our children perceive the world. I have no problems with our kids learning history and the truth, a lot of which I did not learn growing up. However, I am concerned with a one-sided, factually disputed agenda being accepted lock, stock, and barrel by the National Education Agency without informing the public about the details in the project. My goal for this video is to provide you information that is not being told about the intention, background, and facts of the 1619 Project. Let me be upfront and let you know I will have to do this video in two parts because the information is overwhelming. I want to make sure I give a good view from both sides on this. I was actually ready to publish the other day, but I pulled back because I found additional information that changed some of my thoughts about this project, and I deemed them to be important. So what is the 1619 Project? To be honest, I had no clue until I did this research. Before I continue, I need to make a point, and I will make it many times throughout this video. While I present this information, keep in mind the information in the 1619 Project is directed at K through 12. While I find a lot of this is opinionated material, appropriate at a university level, I do not find it appropriate for K through 12 in many situations. Remember the audience as I continue. According to Wiki, the 1619 Project is an ongoing project developed by the New York Times Magazine with the goal of re-examining the legacy of slavery in the United States and timed for the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first Africans in Virginia. I do not have a problem with this definition and fully support corrections to history based on facts. I only wish this was true for the 1619 Project. For starters, this project comes from the New York Times Magazine, which is an indicator that there may be a bias. But let's not decide until we look further into the information being presented, as well as many history facts that are not being reported in the project. An initial concern of mine is why the New York Times Magazine is set in the curriculum for our K-12 schools. I find that a bit odd and out of place. What about you? Let me know your thoughts because I've been out of the mainstream K-12 world for quite some time, at least at the levels of the teaching material. But let's continue. According to PBS, the goal of the 1619 Project is to reframe American history by stating that 1619 is really our nation's birth, as well as the start of slavery. Both of these statements are false, as I will explain. Re-examining our history and reviewing the good and bad history events is not an issue in my opinion. I fully support the truth. The truth should be told and incorrect facts should be updated. But I do have a problem with an attempt to reframe our history on misinformation and single-sided opinions that have been disputed by many experts. You cannot teach history by throwing out the old proven facts and replacing this information with disputed facts and opinions. While our history is full of references on slavery and discrimination against others, there's not a country in the world that hasn't had the same issues. The key is we are improving, and we need to continuously do so by correcting the facts where applicable. Think about our history and how we evolved to the point that we recently broke the race barrier for President of the United States. This was a major step in our history, whether you cared for Obama or not. We need to always march forward for equality, for all. But I do not believe we replace facts with opinions and narratives. That won't do it for me. My concern is I have found exactly that in the 1619 Project. For my research, I have found a few items that are actually wrong and proven wrong by the experts. And that is the attempt of this project to redefine the starting point of our country as 1619 based on the arrival of 20 blacks stolen by the English from a Spanish slave ship and brought to Point Comfort, which is basically not disputed. But this is where the narrative gets very muddy, and this project tries to clear things up with facts that simply are not true. These were not the first blacks in North America, nor were they slaves, as you will see. Actually, in my opinion, this was a gift to these blacks because if they went to their original port, they would have been slaves. They were not slaves at this point. Both of these points I will cover later. I already stated that the 1619 Project comes from the New York Times Magazine. But who is the face behind the scenes? The primary advocate, director, and Pulitzer Prize winner for the 1619 Project is Nicole Sherry Hannah-Jones, who I will cover in a separate section. As I previously stated, the core of this project is built on the inaccurate account of stating these Africans from 1619 were the first blacks in North America and that they were slaves. They were not slaves, and even PBS has stated that these individuals were actually indentured servants. But Nicole and the New York Times don't care. They refused to update their project even in the face of the facts. Why, you might ask? I know why, and you will as we cover more about the 1619 Project. One quick point. I'm not saying that there wasn't violence and that these people were treated correctly. They were indentured servants, and we all know that was a bad scene for a lot of people. And it was not considered slavery at the time. The PBS site states that in 1619 there were no slave laws in place, and these individuals were treated as indentured servants and were given the same opportunities for freedom as whites. They go on to state that the first slave laws were created in Massachusetts in 1641 and Virginia in 1661, which really is the starting point of slavery, verified by many historians. But you will not get this information from the 1619 Project. Let's continue. The New York Post states that Princeton historian Sean Wilentz made mincemeat of the 1619 Project. The idea that protecting slavery was a main motive of the American Revolution, and the statement that Abraham Lincoln opposed black equality after the Civil War is a false narrative. Is this just another factual error, or is the 1619 just opinion? He went on and was joined by Brown University's Gordon Wood, Princeton's James McPherson, and the City University of New York's Jamie Oakes. All of them expressed concerns to the Times about factual errors in articles included with this project. Professor Wood is a premier historian of the American Revolution and pointed out that he didn't know of any colonists who said they wanted independence in order to preserve their slaves. a bit contrary to the 1619 project. To continue, McPherson states that he was disturbed by what seemed a one sided account and the omission of context and perspective. And Professor Oates, a lead in historian of the Reconstructions, calls the idea that slavery or racism is built into the DNA of America is a really dangerous trope. And he adds, this is not historical, but actually anti historical and denies change over time. No counterpoints are provided in the 1619 project, and kids are expected to take everything at face value. That's a problem, in my opinion, and this material is already in your schools. Now let's continue and cover some information that's not being reported in this project. There's no discussion of black leaders of the time and their white allies that helped change the direction of slavery. Why would this information not be included in the project? You will understand why later when I discuss the goals of the author, Nicole Sherry Hannah Jones. Did you know that Asa Philip Randolph was an American labor unionist, civil rights activist, and socialist politician? And he was black. In 1925, he organized the first predominantly African American labor union. But yet there is no mention of this historic African American. Seems strange that a major project on black history would leave this figure out. How about the 1920s Harlem Renaissance? That was an intellectual, social, and artistic explosion that centered in Harlem. At the time, it was known as the New Negro Movement, named after the New Negro, a 1925 anthology edited by Alan Locke. Another key bit of information that seems to be missing from this project. I actually learned about these events while doing my research. It is very interesting, and I do not know why these historic events were excluded. Maybe, just maybe, there is an agenda behind the 1619 project, and it is not factual history, in my opinion. I project that progressives and liberals will attack and call any people or groups racist that disagree with the 1619 project. But realize my facts are coming primarily from liberals and progressives. The sources I have used so far, professors of history Will Nentz, McPherson, and Oakes, are liberal professors, and in fact, Will Nentz is a strong Democrat and supported the impeachment of Trump. I find it rather refreshing that in my research I can actually use liberals to dispute what other liberals are stating as fact. The bottom line is that Nicole, backed by the Times, is working hard to get this information into your schools. Why would we let fiction and non-truths be taught to our kids? Make sure you know what your kids are being taught, or what we have in the streets now will pale in comparison in the future. It is time to stand up to the cancel PC culture, in my opinion. I am old and won't be around to see the impacts of this infiltration into our schools, but I can at least get the word out. Now, for all of you that have kids or grandkids in school, know that the National Education Association has contacted the New York Times to distribute copies of the 1619 project to educators and activists around the country. They even provided a link on their site to expand the distribution of this material. You would think anything going into our schools, particularly K through 12, would be researched. This tells you where the NEA is coming from. Don't trust them. Do your research. For those of you that don't know, the NEA is the nation's largest professional employee organization, and they state they are committed to advancing the cause of public education. They have organizations in each state and in more than 4,000 communities across the United States. Don't you think it is concerning that they are promoting the 1619 project? I do. A Washington Times piece sums it up quite well. The National Education Association is aggressively promoting an anti-American, polarizing agenda that is the root of the current racial divisions and rioting. They do this using clever messaging and the New York Times much ballyhooed 1619 Project, which intentionally perverts American history. Quite blunt, but quite true, in my opinion. Up to this point, I have been providing references and quotes from mostly liberal sites, which means the liberals have no ground to stand on unless they criticize other liberals. It seems clear to me that the 1619 Project is intended to promote a narrative more than educate our children. Now, I want to discuss a YouTube video that I discovered by Roland Martin, a Black American journalist that was a commentator for TV1 and has been a CNN contributor appearing on a variety of shows. He is definitely not a Trump supporter, is all I will say. But this video is great work with straight out facts. His guests include Dr. Carr, a Afro-American Studies professor at Howard University, as well as Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander, a history professor from Norfolk State University. This is a must-watch video, and I won't go into a lot of details, but let me highlight a few key points made during the video. Contrary to what is presented in the 1619 Project, the first blacks that arrived in North America were not slaves, but bonded or indentured servants. And this is validated more than once in this video. As I stated earlier, slavery isn't identified until the 1640s. There was also a comment in the video that said these blacks were not the first in North America. But I had a hard time finding any references to confirm this, at least on Google. But you know what? I found references on DuckDuckGo.com, another search site. Funny that Google seems to filter the information that was at the top of the list at the DuckDuckGo site. Censorship by Google? Maybe. So here's what I found, and this is not from a conservative site, as you can see. The source states that the identity of the first documented African to arrive in North America is known. We know his name. His name was Juan Garrido. And more astonishing, he wasn't even a slave. Next year will be the 500th anniversary of his arrival in Florida, and the state plans to commemorate this remarkable event. Oh, wow. So the 1619 Project is wrong on stating the facts that the first blacks arrived in Virginia and that they were slaves. Amazing that a Pulitzer-winning journalist overlooked both of these facts. Intentionally? I think so, but you can make up your own mind as you learn more. Let's continue by reviewing the primary advocate, director, and Pulitzer Prize winner for the 1619 Project, Nicole Sherry Hannah-Jones. Nicole is an American investigative journalist known for covering civil rights in the United States. In April 2015, she joined the staff at the New York Times and was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for commentary in 2020. Wow, these are great accomplishments by Nicole. You would think a high-caliber journalist would do proper research for a project, but she certainly did not, or she purposely ignored the truth. So, as many journalists do, she may have missed a few tidbits or facts, which is not a biggie. But the major problem I have is that Nicole ignored the facts from history experts and went on with her story. She was told straight out that the 1619 Project was providing a false narrative and incorrect facts. But no matter, she went forward and published the project. Receiving a Pulitzer Prize for this misreporting is a travesty, and the Pulitzer Committee should reevaluate their review process. During my research, I found some documented comments from Nicole while she was presented at a couple of universities. These comments tell you where she's coming from. At a Chicago University event where she was explaining her modus operandi as a journalist, she states, I think we really need to question why people are so opposed to making restitution for what was done. I'm not writing to convert Trump supporters. I write to try to get liberal white people to do what they say they believe in. I'm making a moral argument. My method is guilt. This statement is alarming and doesn't reference educating anyone, at least not by facts. Here's another comment at Xavier University. She states, I'm not expecting that white people should feel guilty about slavery if you didn't enslave anybody yourself. But I am saying that you can't pretend that you're free of that legacy. And you can't pretend that you're not benefiting from that legacy. Your work is not to apologize for slavery, though the federal government should. You inherit the good, but you also inherit the bad. You inherit the debt that is owed. Debt that is owed is reparations. So we now know the goal of Nicole and the New York Times, in my opinion. Concerned yet? You should be very concerned. There's another report about Nicole's comment when asked about the contribution of white abolitionists to end slavery. She says, I don't see given credit for fighting to end an institution that you created. That's just the way I think about it. We have plenty of stories in 400 years about white heroes. We have given outsized attention to what I would call good white people. She further states, I think it was important not to give white people that escape when they were reading this. This is a bottom-up history about people who never get any credit. Very intentionally, we were creating a counter-narrative. So we now know that this is intentionally a one-sided view, and it is coming from a journalist pushing for reparations legislation. How convenient. Go after the kids to get to the parents. And that is my opinion and how I feel. Remember the audience, K through 12. If you're not concerned yet, I'm not sure what it will take, but I do have more. Okay, let's move on and evaluate some of the content being promoted by the 1619 project. According to the Heritage Foundation, the launching of this project will accelerate a trend that teaches our children to blame slavery on capitalism and promotes socialism as a path to racial equity. I tend to agree with this statement after reviewing some of the lesson plans and the suggested reading material. Let's drill down into the content being promoted, because the devil is always in the details. A lot of the following information comes from a new site that I use called influencewatch.org. You can research the sources at this site if need be. I'm finding more and more of these type sites that are just fed up with the lying media that is part of the Democratic Resist movement. This is a good site to visit for research, and I suggest you use them. Before I get into the content, I want you to know that according to Influence Watch, there are tens of thousands of copies of the magazine that have been provided to K through 12 schools, including lesson plans that have been adopted district-wide in 5 large school districts: Buffalo, New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Wilmington, Delaware, and Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I don't like this at all, and I think this project is quickly trying to roll out under the cover of election year, COVID, budgeting, or many other national priorities. If this continues, false facts will be taught to our children nationwide. Next, I want to cover a few items from the project which you can see on the screen. All of these examples seem rather one-sided to me, and it forces students to prove a predetermined, potentially false narrative. It always seems that context and awareness of the times is excluded, which makes this a narrowly constrained view for the kids. Remember the audience. I believe this is intentional because of comments that I have covered by Nicole. I have problems with this approach and the box they are putting our kids in to get a predetermined result. Young kids do not need a single focus of the world. It is time their minds should be wide open to grow and not be limited by a forced, constrained view of the world. And that is what this project is doing, in my opinion. So there are 5 professors in the history field of study who sent their concerns to the New York Times. Get that? Before this project was released. The editor-in-chief of the New York Times responded back with a criticism of the criticism. The editor decided to ignore the experts and continue on promoting a false narrative. What else would you expect from the New York Times? The editor's comment was basically calling this collection of professors liars and ideologists. Wow, and this is coming from the New York Times? But this should give you concern about the 1619 project. Look at the Times statement. But this is not the end of the criticism provided to the Times. There was another group of 12 professors of history and political science, specialized expertise in the Civil War, and they submitted a separate letter to the New York Times, citing concerns specific to their field. These professors come from prominent institutions and include the University of Notre Dame, Yale University, Michigan State University, the University of Alabama, Princeton University, and Washington and Lee University. But the New York Times and Nichols still went forward in the face of all these experts. I guess journalists know more than this collection of professional experts that have studied these subjects for decades. This puts the credibility of the New York Times and the project in question, in my opinion. I personally don't believe this project is to teach our kids, but rather to manipulate our kids into feeling guilt and believing a false narrative. Now, I've been pretty hard on the 1619 project because truth is needed in history, especially if it is being taught to our children. Opinions and essays without corresponding views may be appropriate for college, but not in K through 12. I'm not even sure it's really appropriate in college. I do want to state, though, that what I have seen from the curriculum is impressive. The lessons, research, and stimulating questions are great in my opinion. The availability of resources is superb. I love it. My concern is not with these great methods, nor the content that 1619 provides. It is amazing, and I will be reading some of the content for part 2 of this video. My issues are: 1. Publishing as facts material that is not factual. But this can be corrected, and it should be. Secondly, and a lot more important, is the approach to force a one-sided view and unsubstantiated opinions on our kids, especially since I believe it is a hidden agenda to achieve a political means. Our kids should not be lab rats for social programs. We already experiment too much on our kids in public schools. Additionally, at the K through 12 levels, we should not be filtering history to force a narrative. Rather, we should be presenting good and bad from various views and with context. We need to open the door to the world to these kids. If these changes can be made, it would be an exceptional project. But I do not see changes on the horizon. That should be concerning. Remember the audience. This is not for college kids. In my opinion, if we ignore the rollout of the 1619 project, we are complicit in the experiment of the cancel PC culture using our kids as lab rats. We need to get the word out, using facts and making sure our kids are taught facts and freedom of thought. This project, as is, could have severe consequences that will impact at least a generation of our kids or grandkids. We cannot let a single focused lens be used to teach our kids. Let's open up everything to the truth. I have no issues with describing our history with the blunt truth, but good and bad without the ideology. Remember the audience, K to 12. I have one question for you to think about. What countries around the world force a single-sided view with no counterpoints allowed. That is all you need to know about how I feel. There's great material in the 1619 Project, but the forced process leaves a lot to be desired. Just look at the comments from the New York Times and Nicole, and you will know this is not appropriate for our kids, in my opinion. I am concerned for my grandkids as well as your kids and grandkids. The 1619 Project is an attempt to change what we know of our history by misusing information and complicit silence on presenting the other side. That is wrong. I have no problem adjusting our history based on new information, but that is not what this project is doing. When you look at the statements by Nicole and the essays provided as learning material, you will fully recognize the intent. And what is really concerning is the intent has been publicly stated. Where is our media? Where is the NEA in providing these facts? Think twice about believing the biased media, and even more the NEA, which is now the conduit to promoting false history to our kids. It is time to stand up and realize what our schools are adopting. This cannot continue, in my opinion. One last tidbit to close out, and that is concerning a favorite of just about everyone, Oprah Winfrey. We all know Oprah from many years on TV, but did you know she is in full support of promoting the 1619 Project? All I have to say is that I don't care if this is Oprah. That doesn't change the facts of this project being a failure in reporting history, in my opinion. So, that wraps up this video, and I hope it was informative for you. I have many opinions, and that is just what it is. My opinion. You decide your own by what I present. And if you have any doubts, do the research. The information is overwhelming, but being overlooked by the biased media and the NEA. Thank you for watching. Be safe, be informed, and stay informed with CIC News for You. This is Charlie, signing off and looking for you again in part 2.